Can you all see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can see it.
So the topic of my talk relates to some research that we've begun over the last year, both in my research group in Trinity, but also in the spin-out that I'm involved with called Acara. And this is looking at how we can start taking UV robots and deploying them in new ways as a means of better disinfecting rooms. So I'll start off with just giving a bit of background on the problem context, and I'll lead into some of the challenges around test methods towards the end. One thing that we've seen over the last number of months, and probably just over a year at this point, is the importance of cleaning, not only in frontline healthcare settings, but also as public transport and all these other areas. And cleaning pertains not only to the surface, but also to air. And the problem is that the actual methods we're using to clean haven't changed notably in over 100 years, and they have many endemic issues. I mentioned some of them here. Manual cleaning, where you send people in, which is still the predominant way of doing things, is hugely time consuming. So this is especially noticeable if you need to do it on a high frequency basis. So think of any kind of rehabilitation setting or radiology context where there's a high throughput of patients. Having to send people in to clean the room after each one of them is takes a long time. Human cleaning typically involves getting chemicals on some sort of a cloth or a sponge or a mop and administering that across a surface. And that's something that is subject to huge degrees of error because some surfaces tend to get higher concentrations of these chemicals than others, and that's something we can't really control for. And of course, the kind of germs we're trying to kill are about 5 to 10 microns in size, so we can't see them. So often we're going in and cleaning and thinking it's clean, but really we can't see the germs, so we've no real way of knowing. Most of the techniques we're using are, as I've kind of alluded to, it's cleaning the surface, not the air. And the methods to clean the air typically involve dispersing toxic chemicals, which require the room to be evacuated for a long period of time. The chemicals that we use to clean are toxic to health, so they cause all kinds of respiratory problems and skin problems if they get in your eyes. Many places can't be thoroughly disinfected because, for example, an ICU, people are in there. You can't really evacuate people, and there's many places where your fingers don't fit or are out of reach. And this massive increase of chemicals we're using is having all kinds of damaging effects on the environment, which of course are far from ideal. So I think we really need new and better ways of doing this. UV light has been a technique that's been used for the best part of 40 years, and it's shown to be highly effective. Certain wavelengths of UV light are highly effective in activating microorganisms across a broad range. So covers bacteria, virus, as well as fungus. And recent research has shown that it's also effective on the strain of the coronavirus that is affecting things right now. And there are technology out there. There is products out there. So kind of broadly speaking, you can kind of categorize them across two axes. One being how they're deployed, if they require the rooms to be evacuated or not. So for simplicity's sake, I've kind of included safe around people, meaning the room doesn't need to be evacuated, unsafe, meaning that it does. So first robots that came out, or first piece of technology that came out, were simply upper air lights. These are UV lights that are placed towards the top of the ceiling that were intended to disinfect the air, not really robots. At least not in the traditional sense. Then these kind of push-in-place robots came about, and basically what these involved is, cleaner would push them into a room, leave the room, and it would zap around it. A company called Blue Ocean Robotics built a robotic version that can move around autonomously. And these two robotic versions I just mentioned, they produce very, very high levels of UV radiation. So if someone was exposed to that, it would exceed occupational limits almost immediately. And from their design, you can see that they irradiate UV light omnidirectionally. So it's not like you could be in a safe part of the room. They intend to irradiate as wide and as far as they possibly can. So there really is a need for a system that is has the benefits of these kind of powerful robotic systems insofar as they can move around and adapt and do things quickly, but actually don't require people in the room. And much of the dialogue on this has said that this isn't possible, but I would strongly challenge this. And in fact, I'd say there's a real strong need for it, because in order for us to, there's kind of two key areas where I think technology like this delivers meaningful value. In the first instance, it's in increasing the ability to rapidly clean rooms, like I mentioned, in radiology, operating rooms, and settings where the turnover time is affected by cleaning time. We've seen in the UK alone nearly 5 million radiology scans fewer, and a big part of that was these room turnover time has increased so much. We're seeing more than half the number of surgeries have been lost out because of these additional turnaround times. So making something that can do this has real value. And the criteria to do so, I think there's kind of three important things that it needs to be able to have. In the first instance, the UV power output of these devices needs to be such that if it is accidentally exposed to someone over a short period of time, that it's not likely to cause any kind of harm. So this would mean that occupational limits of the technology that are currently in use should be considered in its design. In the second instance, these robots should be actively limiting the field of irradiation, meaning that not the full part of the room is getting irradiated. And this, I think, has important implications for how either a teleoperator might be able to control it, or how some member staff may be able to actually work alongside it. And then finally, where people are in the room, where possible, shielding and PPE should be used to protect their skin and eyes. And this is actually easier than it sounds, because if you think of when you're in a car and the sun is shining, you don't get a suntan through the car, and that's because UV light is very, very easily filtered out. So very basic clothing and just conventional face shields may be enough to be able to provide that protection. It's not specialist gear that's needed. So there's two distinct scenarios where I kind of perceive this idea of a collaborative HRI involving a UV robot. In the first instance, it's very similar to a traditional teleoperation application, whereby a human teleoperator would stand directly behind the robot in the shadow of its UV light and can direct it as necessary. This case is probably going to be useful in cases where the environment might be very unstructured, such as kind of a public waiting area or a multi-bed ward, where getting the robot to perform very repetitively isn't going to be possible. In this case, I think cleaners are probably well positioned to do that task. The second scenario is a little bit more involved. This is where the robot might be deployed alongside a cleaner. And here you can kind of see a simplified scenario where there's maybe two parts of the room. One part where there's an X-ray machine or a CT scan machine, and the other part where there's just a kind of a preparation area. In this instance, you might have the person start off cleaning that piece where they maybe remove dust and grime and things that the UV light can't physically get to, before swapping over, and then the robot goes to the other area and the person moves somewhere else in the room. So this is more of a synchronous process. And of course, there will be, once we manage to demonstrate the feasibility of this, there's all kinds of ways in which the person and the robot can more meaningfully interact. I'll show a kind of a demo of this in practice taken recently. So here you'll see an operator turn the robot on. Initially, what you're seeing here is the lights warming up, and before the robot follows its process. And here you can see that the directionality of the light is limited, meaning that the operator can, or the cleaner in this case, can safely work in the background without being exposed. And again, the kind of PPE that's being worn here would cover, under most circumstances, any incidental exposures. So all said and done, that process was somewhere between 8 and 10 minutes. And the conventional process that currently involves people, that's averaging out currently at between 20 minutes to an hour, depending on if there's a wait time at the start. And a big reason for that is that when you're using wet chemicals, there's a nominal contact period of between 10 and 15 minutes where the chemical has to dry before you can send someone into the room after it. And so from a feasibility perspective, I think this is certainly possible, but the challenge now becomes how do we actually develop test methods to show in a systematic way that this is intrinsically safe. So I think there's three kind of key areas where certainly I see the need for the development of these new test methods. In the first instance, having some understanding of what the maximum output of these UV devices might be, in such a way that if someone was to enter the room and accidentally be exposed, that they would still fall within occupational safety limits that are defined by the likes of the European Union. And the second instance is how can we systematically measure the background radiation, so that if there is a cleaner in the room, that we're providing safety to them, even if they're not being directly exposed to it. The reflectiveness off the walls and so on isn't actually exceeding any kind of isn't creating any kind of problems. And then in the final instance, how can we demonstrate the effectiveness of PPE? Because in many applications, it's not going to be possible to make sure that every single item of clothing that the cleaner is wearing, or the people in the room are wearing, are specially evaluated for this. For this technology, is there a way in which we can provide confidence that most things will be safe? So these are kind of three open questions that I just wanted to finish with, and these are areas where we hope to continue doing research in, and any kind of, I guess, questions or insights that anyone here might have would be greatly appreciated to informing these tests.